just to let you know that Frank's just had a signing going on downstairs. Just to wrap up, we're about 5 minutes away. But I figured we could sit here and talk a little bit about today's panel. I mean, one of the great things for me, I could do my Frank Miller story beforehand, okay? So I was a big Frank Miller fan when I first started at DC Comics, which is in January of 2002. Frank was in the process of doing Dark Knight Strikes Again, the second Dark Knight book. And I have to admit, you know, when you come into these businesses, you know, as a long-term fan, when you start to meet some people you really like and love, you get a little starstruck in the beginning. And with Frank, he was in the editor's office of the Dark Knight book, a guy by the name of Bob Schreck, and he was in there discussing Dark Knight. And I walked in the room not expecting to see him, and there he was. So it was the most exciting thing for me because you try to maintain your cool, right? You know what it's like, you try to keep it together, but you always wind up saying something stupid or just not saying anything at all, which was my case. But I listened to Frank talk, and it was the first time I ever saw Frank's original art and had a chance to really get a sense of his creative process just in the few moments we were together. But he was talking about how he took nails, actual physical nails, and scraped them across the board with ink to give this visceral feel, because so much of what he was feeling then was still a lot left over from 9/11 at the time, and there was a lot of emotion being put on the page. And he was working on pages that were literally twice the size of a normal comic book art page. And when I saw that, you realized you were doing and working with something completely different, somebody who really working at a completely different level than most of the folks you were working with. And it was an exciting thing for me. Of course, I didn't say a word. I don't think you even remember who I was from that particular moment, but I'm okay with that because I like to carry that memory with me. But it wasn't until later on that, you know, we kept on figuring out ways to work with them, and we had been doing All-Star Batman and Robin. And anybody fans of that book? Fans of the book? Anybody like it? It's funny because that one gets a lot of mixed response.
When are you going to end it?
Oh. I think you got the wrong publisher on that one. But what was great about All-Star Batman and Robin, when it started and when it almost ended, was that Frank said, you know, he already saw The Dark Knight. He was really trying to tell a version of Batman that nobody saw before. And he approaches things with no fear, in the sense that, I don't care if this is going to piss people off. This is something I want to say. I don't want to repeat myself. I want to do something different. That's why you see his art evolve and things will change. And I think that's something that's wonderful for any creator, to be able to have that level of confidence in themselves, to evolve themselves, to change their artwork as they go forward. And I always enjoyed working on that. And working on that book, that's when I got to know him a lot better. But you're right, we don't know when that's going to end, but it is something that we do talk about on a regular basis. But I remember, and he'll tell the story, but I'm going to do it since he's not here. Screw him. But anyway, that's what you get for being late, Frank. You lose good stories. So he tells the stories about how much he doesn't. We're here. There we're here. Excellent. Well, damn it, I wanted to do the story and now I can't. So, without any further ado, the person you're here for, I'd like to introduce the one and only Mr. Frank Miller. I've been lying to the fans and telling them how much I enjoy your work. Okay, because don't anybody ever repeat that, because he just uses it in contract negotiations against me. I guess we're starting adversarial right from the beginning, aren't we?
No, it's adversarial.
No, not at all. Not at all. This is you in a better mood. So, gentlemen, I don't even know where to start. You know what? Let's start with where we are right now.
Wait a minute, you didn't prepare.
I'm always prepared. You know me.
You don't know where to start. That's a deal.
Okay, I apologize. Okay, good. Okay. Did you want to tell them, or do I have to? Oh, that's me, I got to tell them? What am I saying again? No cameras? Okay. I'm sorry, at this particular moment, no cameras at this moment. Okay, I guess, did I get that right? Did I get that? I don't know what I'm doing here. Okay, so back to you.
Yes, you were saying how well prepared you were.
I am well prepared, except the no camera thing threw me off, so I don't know what that means. But gentlemen, I mean, here we are. I mean, the process behind DK3 has been a long one, but it seems torturous. I mean, for you and all that, I mean, we've discussed this in other rooms, so I really want to start here. Just where you were at the start with the original Dark Knight Returns, and how do we get to this spot right now? But in the creation of the first Dark Knight Returns, how much have you evolved, how much has the material evolved, and how much have you brought to the product as you move forward?
Well, where were you born and where have you done since then?
Exactly, that's what I asked you.
No, Dark Knight's genesis was Dick Giordano had everything to do with it. He was on me to do something with Batman, and I said I really don't feel ready. You know, he's just the biggest, coolest character there is, and I don't know what I can do, what I can contribute after Neil Adams. The time went by, and I turned 29 and started dreading the year that was coming next. And so I thought, you know, I can't stand the fact that, you know, Batman's 29, Superman's 29. I'm gonna be older than these guys. I gotta do something about this. And so then I got the idea of making him possibly old. I made him 50. and so, you know, the Dark Knight was born in the course of that, but I did start playing with time and where the characters could go. Things were opening up wonderfully at DC Comics. From being this dodgy old company, they all of a sudden, under Jeanette Kahn, were opening up creatively to all kinds of new things. The British invasion was upon us, and it was a perfect time. And also, they were a Hurton number 2. You always want to work for the Hurton number 2 because they're willing to try things. Marvel was getting a little too fat and happy, and DC really was I felt a place where I could the most latitude. I just done Ronin at DC. Well, thanks a lot. And it's been given amazing freedom on that. And so jumping into Dark Knight was natural. All the stars were aligned.
That's great. And Klaus, how did you come into the project too?
You know, I was working at DC at that time. I was doing a couple of projects for them. And I remember very distinctly walking in the hallway. I don't know if you know this, Dick Giordano was my mentor.
I did not know
and I was his assistant for about a year. We lived next to each other, and as a matter of fact, I met Dick when I was about 18 or 19. I did a tour of DC Comics. It's a long story, we don't have time for it. But Dick walked up to me in the hallway as I was dropping off pages. I guess this was 85, right? 85?
Yeah.
And Dick asked me, he said, I remember exactly what he said. He said, Frank is going to be doing a Batman project, and he wants to know if you'd like to work on it with him. And it was literally 3 seconds. I mean, I just said, yes, of course. I would love to work with Frank. You know, we had done Daredevil, and it was a wonderful thing. You know, working with Frank on that project was a wonderful experience, and I credit that experience for making me a better artist, because Frank was so generous in terms of letting me do and accept more responsibility for the art.
Oh yeah.
Which was just such a growth experience for me. So, I mean, when Dick asked me to do this, I immediately said yes. There was, you know, it was a classic no-brainer.
That's great. And I know I've asked this question before, but I'm from this crowd. You were surprised or weren't surprised by the success of it? Because I know that there was some reticence within DC about the property.
Oh, sure there was, yeah. You know, it made people, particularly the book's editor, terribly nervous. But other people just embraced it. The two people I would say embraced it most enthusiastically were the two most powerful, Giordano and Jeanette Kahn. And once they were enthusiastic, nothing really could stop it. But then out came that was also added to the gamble by the format, because no one had tried that particular format. I wanted to introduce the European album format more forcefully into the American market. But I was told at the time you couldn't do that. You couldn't do this book in that format because of the spinners that were in comic shops. Well, okay, they'll go to the comic shops to see they don't do spinners anymore. And then later I was told because the polybags weren't big enough. And for that reason we had to say the only comics that were that shape in the world. But that format was created for that book, and it has its own appeal, and it worked very well.
And I mean, realistically, you also had, you had been worked on and experimented on better stock and better cover and better paper through Ronin and other projects, but this one really kicked off the whole prestige line, really launched so many projects following that fashion.
And then Bob Rozakis at DC was a hands-on production guy who was picking stocks and all.
And Dark Knight, we accept so many of the groundbreaking things that DK1 did as just everyday occurrences these days. But if I'm not mistaken, and I'll check this with Frank, I think that Dark Knight was the first time that a comic book went to a second printing.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine that? The first time that a comic book went to a second printing, we take that for granted all the time now.
It was a very big deal. As a matter of fact, the upper echelon at DC had to call up Jeanette Kahn, who was vacationing somewhere, to her to get approval to go back to press. So it was a very big deal.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, especially with the first issue. And now, but that's going back to press in the first issue. As the story developed and as it went forward, how much of the original conceit that you had in mind for that story, how much did that hold in place? Did any of it change along the way? Did it evolve? Or did you know it was beginning?
Oh, did it ever? I mean, it changed a lot. Originally a much more monomaniacal crime story with Batman in it, and the antagonist was Superman, but it was mostly the police. And in fact, I mean, it made my whole career, I just about never changed my ending, but with Dark Knight I did, because my original ending for Dark Knight ended in his death. But as I approached the story, it just wasn't going to happen. I even threw in a line from Commissioner Yindel just staring out saying, "He's too big," and it just didn't seem like the right thing to do.
And then when it comes together, it finds this second life as a book, and we're still selling it to this day. Again, paving the way in ways that we hadn't seen in publication before. Is this what you anticipated? Is this what you were hoping for, or did you expect it just to run the same course most traditional comics?
Well, it's certainly what I was hoping for, because every artist wants to leave some sort of legacy, and wants to think in terms of the future. And I always thought that as the comic book shops sprouted up, and as I first got exposed to them when I came to New York, I became aware of our future, that you could actually walk into a shop and see the entire history of comics waiting for you instead of this month's comics. And here it is.
That's for sure.
Now people leave online and go to like big shows where people talk about this stuff.
You know what? Here's an interesting question about that, because we're faced with this on a lot of levels. The fact that these books do stay in print and always are available and always on the shelf, how does that challenge you when you're returning back to a character or back to a project? So you come back for Dark Knight Strikes Again, you come back to DK3. Are you looking at your previous work? Are you just staying clear of it? How do you manage your own expectations, your own material, compared to the fact that you have a constant reminder on the shelves at all times?
I think the best way to handle it is you look it over, And on the one hand, you would already say, well, I wasn't so good about this, and that drawing, really, Frankie could have done better. And then you go, but boy, I'll never capture that particular feeling again, and you know, with that, or this will never be new again. On the other hand, it's that can just as easily be a challenge. With a whole, and new ideas just come. They just come right from Ontario. I thought that I was really finished with Dark Knight, but in the process of this book, I become aware of a whole new possibilities where I'm going to take this epic or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we talk about the world now, not just about Batman, it's about the world that's been created around him.
Yeah.
Klaus, I'm going to go for you a second also. I mean, like you said, you worked on Daredevil and you were on The Dark Knight. Did you bring or change anything in the way you worked in the project in regards to the formatting and the way the project came together, or just because it felt like it was coming together differently than just a standard comic?
It's so hard to evaluate the scope of the projects that you're working on, whether or not they have a long life when you're in it. But I certainly knew that working with Frank was always a special occasion, and I try very, very hard to do my best work. I like to say that you don't generally wake up in the morning and say, I can't wait to do a crappy comic book. You really try to do your very, very best. And working with somebody that is obviously as talented as Frank just motivates me that much more. So, in a very general way, I know that working with Frank always gets the best work out of me. Whatever the occasion or whatever the project.
There's also something that does happen occasionally, is that people make for good partnerships. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that when Klaus and I hooked up on Daredevil, the team to beat was John Byrne and Terry Austin. When I first met Jim Shooter at Marvel, he said, "This is the look we're going for." And I said, "You better fire me now." I mean, I just know I can't even think like this guy. This is from another dimension for me. And so in a way we became the I don't know, because that was the Republican Party, we were the Democratic Party.
That's like a yin and yang.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. You see that, you're saying that in comparing to other artists, but let's bifurcate your own work with just Batman alone. You worked on Dark Knight, then you did Batman Year One, and then even flash forward to All-Star Batman and Robin. In your mind, is that all the same character, or different character interpretations?
I see them all as the same character. In Batman Year One is very much the disciplined, just absolutely motivated and cerebral, but untested Batman that is going out. And it's very much a crime story. Mazzucchelli was the perfect artist to work with on it because his work it harkened back into Dick Tracy in its bluntness and its matter of factness. The All-Star Batman with Jim Lee was again a perfect coincidence of who the artist was, because that was Batman at his peak of physical abilities, but on an emotional berserker course. That he was overplaying his hand, and he was reckless, and it was where the crazy Batman surfaced the most, and so he was actually at his peak of his physical abilities, but he wasn't the Batman who he was going to be. In between All-Star and Dark Knight is the entire run of Batman comics by everybody else.
That's good for all the continuity freaks in the room. So when you put all your books together, now you know how to line them up, okay? You know, and I always like to point this out. We talk about this internally, but I don't know how much credit you get externally on this, but it's really important to say. It's interesting for us because when you look at Batman in the 60s, which everybody remembers very fondly, when that collapsed, Batman almost collapsed with it. The popularity of Batman was never lower. As a matter of fact, I was talking to people about how even things like Detective Comics were on the brink of cancellation, and they had to struggle to keep Batman books on the shelves, and it was not a bestseller. And a lot of people attribute...
Folks, if you're just getting into comics, you want the one that they can cancel. That's how I got Daredevil, that's how I got Batman.
And exactly, and that's what I was going to get to, because ultimately, while people look at the Batman movie as what revitalized the franchise, it's actually before that. Your material precedes that. Did you realize that this was occurring while this book was taking place?
No, you come in and really you do the best you can with the material. I mean, if you come in saying I'm going to make this franchise more valuable or I'm going to make this a bestseller, you're really the nice way to put it would be a fool there, and the bad way to say it is you're sort of selling the soul. You really have to go in with the absolute best intention to the best possible job. And then the publisher can help you do that, and then they can do the best to produce it and to sell it to the world. And so it's all these things have to line up the right way for something to go with that thing.
You brought up Daredevil. I want to go back to Daredevil for a second, because Batman, you had a clear story. When you took on Daredevil, did you have as much a story in place or much of a map? I mean, you were on the book for 3 years or more than that?
4 years.
4 years. Did you have a game plan, a set idea of what you wanted to take that character, or to just go? What?
I made it up as I went along.
Well, I think, I think we've spoken about this occasionally, that you certainly had the idea of Elektra.
Yes.
And the recurrence of her in Matt Murdock's life.
Oh, you're talking about Yeah, Elektra, the Kingpin, Bullseye. Well,
right.
And as it developed, I realized that I was under orders to produce something that had a complete story in each issue. That was Jim Shooter's way of producing stuff. But I realized that within that wasn't that much of a confinement, I realized. And that I could produce an entire dramatic unit in each issue, but it would be part of a larger whole. And so, if you look at the whole Daredevil and Elektra run, which is something like 13 issues, each one does have a story, but it is one big, epic.
That's great. Okay, before we got here, I was talking a little bit about when you might not remember, but I remember so clearly. When I first met you, you were in Bob Schreck's office talking about and showing pages from Dark Knight Strikes Again, and you're explaining the visceral nature of how you worked on those pages, different than anything else. What made you come back to do Dark Knight Strikes Again? It was 15 years later?
Is that much?
I'm trying to think, if 85 to 2001?
I think it was 15,
yeah. So it seems like we're on 15-year terms, which means that this is 17. But back 2030, you're back again with number 4.
You're on.
But again, when you come back and you take on that project again, what's different in you? How have you changed, and how does it change your work?
Well, how I've changed would really be the subject of conversation with a therapist, but my perception of the character certainly changes over time. I mean, I think my basic idea of what a hero is stays the same. It's just I want to enjoy different aspects of him. Like I said, in going from the young detective at year 1 to the reckless youth in All-Star, and then to the weathered comeback kid in Dark Knight. In phase, it has to be new, but it has to be an extension of what came before. Matter of fact, Dark Knight, for all that it was called an upheaval, it was pretty damn faithful to everything that had gone before.
When did your love affair with Carrie Kelly begin?
when I made her up. It's I think there was one moment where she first goes out, and I gave her the line, "Next up, fighting crimes." That I went, I think I found somebody here. And then when she rescues Batman, that was the big moment. When she rescues him, and he's asking her what her name is, and she says, Kelly, Carrie Kelly, Robin. That was where I felt she really came of age.
No, let me just say that the thing that I always like to point out is that in an era of an attempt to create more diverse characters and a greater variety of characters, Frank was way ahead of his time in making Robin a girl. And I think he doesn't really get enough credit for that, because it certainly was way ahead of its time in terms of introducing a character that was, standardized male character and changing it into female. I think it was a terrific move and frankly kind of brilliant on your part.
Yeah, sure made sense of that costume.
I could never see a boy in that.
and it also told Frederick Wortham where to go.
Now, it's the reason why I brought that up is Carrie Kelly indirectly started the conversations for Dark Knight 3, DK3. If I remember our timeline correctly, we were about to include Carrie Kelly in a Batman and Robin series in DC, and Frank was not part of it at the time. And I think we spoke, and you would prefer to be the person really leading the charge, creatively. So, out of respect, we decided to pull Carrie Kelly out of the books. And part of the conversation was about that you had more.
I'd like to interject, which is actually something that is uncommon in comics history. Companies that own their material, to show respect to someone who's in that position it speaks very well to DC Comics.
But in the course of our conversations, thank you for that. But in the course of our conversations, you said you had more stories to tell. I think that's where this started.
All right.
And that started a process of coming about several meetings about DK3. When did you know DK3 was ready to go?
When you told me.
Okay. I thought you never listened to me. You said that.
If it involves work,
But you had pretty much the story that is on the paper, for the most part, pretty much in mind from day one, about where you wanted the beginning, middle, and end. But it was also a lot about, it wasn't just about Carrie. The reason we're going to Carrie, because then all of a sudden you bring Laura Kent into the mix. And now we have another character really moving the story forward in a way that bringing us into new areas. When you start DK3, I mean, Batman seems to be, as always, the focus, but it is about so much more.
Yeah. Well, there's like I said, there's a definite girl power to Dark Knight. That's sort of the thing that I really like. And with Carrie and with Lara, you have distinct good daughter, bad daughter characters. And the bad daughter happens to have the power of Superman. So it's a scary combo. And that just opens up things endlessly.
It looks great. I'm going to go to you, Klaus, for a second, because you coming back into the mix also, going from the first Dark Knight and then coming back in here, how was that? Because this is an extended period of time revisiting these characters. How did that feel for you?
Look, I'm extremely grateful. I think that working on a project like DK3, Frank mentioned the word legacy earlier. I think that if I know what's going to be on my tombstone. Here lies the anchor of Dark Knight. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly fine with it. It's a pleasure. That's what I'll tell you.
But they just gave me our 5-minute warning, so I want to make sure that we show that this isn't just where we are right now, but where we hope to be in the future. What else do you Now that we have these 3 volumes and everybody loves the idea of trilogies, you see more, though, right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Not dead yet. Every story tends to bring new ones, and the potential of these characters is they created so long ago, and have been through so many permutations and interpretations. It just opens up more possibilities. It's like if you look at Batman, he's like Superman. You can interpret him any different way, and it works. I mean, the old Dick Sprang drawings are great. That old Adam West show was just dandy. I loved it when I was a kid. And the Neil Adams and Dick Giordano interpretation was terrific. And none of these contradicts any before or after. And it's just different permutations of a character that's so iconic that you can't break them.
Klaus, also, I mean, out of all the characters you're working on in this little big thing, which ones really come out to you? Which ones do you enjoy working on the most? And I did ask the question also, how was it working on inking with Andy on it instead of on Frank? What was different in your style going forward, working on the 2 different projects?
Nice.
There is a difference between Andy and Frank's pencils, obviously. I think, they're 2 different people. But I think Andy tried to hew a little closer to what Frank was doing, and so that helped a bit. Frank's pencils are very angular, and Andy's tends to be a little rounder, and so I try to emphasize that, I try to help the penciler as much as I can.
I've never even one more question for you, Frank. Also,
Sure.
in working with Andy, I mean, you actually had to sit him down and really coach him a lot, because he was nervous at the start coming on these books.
I tell him the deltoid's here, and he doesn't need any help from me. We talk a bit. He and I have a great time together, and he would ask me questions and such, and we'd go over these, ask me what I was thinking when I did this or that, and I would tell him which of my bad ideas to discard, and it was just a jovial conversation between 2 guys who like each other.
And just to say, I know Andy has, I'm sure he's mentioned this to you as he has mentioned this to me, Andy says he learned an incredible amount working on DK3. So, any project where you can make a living and learn a lot, that's a pretty good gig.
Especially when your dad was Joe Kubert.
Still learning there. Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
Is that t-shirt legit?
Which one? Is that a legit t-shirt?
No, that one.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it at Walmart, $7.
I'm just trying to get. What I try to do is I try to get Lucy's paranoid side. They got the thing on licensing.
Always on edge. Always on edge.
If you want some bootleg Carrie Kelly dolls, I got them in the box.
You know what? We've been talking about Dark Knight, but I'm going to close on your next big project. We're all set to go. We've announced a new book with you and John Romita, Superman Year 1. We did announce that, right? You did? Yeah, okay. From Batman Year 1 to Superman Year 1, what's different, and what are you looking to do with this story?
Well, everything's different. What I really want to do is have this Superman book when you can pick up if you've never heard of it, and be or if you already know you think you know all about him, to introduce you to a bunch of stuff that you don't know. Because we need help. But it's as it was with Batman Year 1. It's to streamline the mythology and to explain where it needs to be explained, but mostly at the beginning to move away all the stuff that's accumulated, strike it back to the essential myth and joy of Superman. You can get lost in a character that's carrying that many titles over that many decades. You can get lost in lose the essence. And I'm not saying they have, it comes and goes, But I'd like to really just strike hard with a book that says Superman's cool and here's why. Because Superman's the first character I fell in love with, and I would love to make my mark.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Val. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.